for all Americans. So in my family, for my black grandchildren and my white grandchildren. I pray we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Leahy. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Turley, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. You recently wrote about the cases of two attorneys, Collinford Mattis and Aruj Rahman. Each of these two defendants was facing domestic terrorism charges based on allegations that they had thrown a Molotov cocktail into a police vehicle during the Antifa riots during the summer of 2020. Despite pleading guilty last year to one count of possessing and making an explosive device, which, as I understood it, should have carried with it a 10-year minimum sentence, the Biden administration, if I understand it correctly, has just agreed to a new plea agreement that will result in just a few years of prison time. Professor Turley, are violent attacks on police officers with explosive devices under this circumstance, are they domestic terrorism events, or are they domestic terror threats?
Well, they certainly can be under the definition that you have at 18 U.S.C. 2331. It can fit into that. You know, there are arguments to be made why they decided to downgrade that case from terrorism, and the plea that you referred to didn't receive a huge amount of condemnation because it was still, as you noted, a plea to an offense that was a 10-year offense. It's to keep in mind, one of these individuals was trying to hand out Molotov cocktails for other people to throw them, and the other one, when she was arrested, said that it was unapologetic and said that they only understand violence when we speak through violence. So these were quite strong cases. They were captured on videotape. So it was surprising when the Department of Justice came in and said, we're going to let you withdraw the earlier plea and then plea down. And as a criminal defense attorney, I thought it was really quite astonishing. I've done national security litigation. I haven't seen anything quite like that double step down with to remove the earlier plea. So I think it was very controversial. And I'm saying that I want to emphasize that I think people of good faith can say that the original designation of the case is terrorism. I can see arguments that this should not fall within that definition. People of good faith can disagree on that. It was the step down from the original plea that was so astonishing for some of us.
Okay. One of the things that I worry about with all of this is that anytime there is an act of domestic terrorism, it should be prosecuted. Domestic terrorism is bad, regardless of what ideology happens to flow from it. And one of the concerns that I've heard expressed about the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, concerns that have been attributed to Department of Justice career attorneys in reviewing the legislation, is they worry that this could artificially constrain the department's resources, directing them toward one particular ideology over another. With domestic terrorism, as in so many other areas of criminal law, there is a high likelihood that what's big one year might change the next year. What's happening a lot in one season of one year might change in the next season of that same year. So my concern would be if we start adopting legislation that directs our activities, devotes more resources to one particular ideology over another, that might leave prosecutors flat-footed when the circumstances change, and that could create other problems. Now, Mr. Herdman, what would be the practical result, in your view, of various executive office reorganizations that would be required within the Department of Justice under the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act?
Well, I think, you know, one concern that I would have is from the perspective of, say, a rabbi in suburban Cleveland, whether the threat to my synagogue is from a white supremacist or it's from a violent jihadist or it's from some other group, that doesn't matter to me as much as the fact that there is a threat that's existent, and federal law enforcement has to be able to respond to the threat to that particular target. So I would worry a little bit about escalating or elevating a particular threat profile because you may unintentionally lose sight of other threats. I think it's better to have a flexible federal law enforcement response, Senator.
And while I've got you on this point, I wanted to ask you about something. That in the aftermath of the extensive violence that occurred in the summer of 2020, particularly in Portland, Oregon, federal prosecutors brought actions. They brought federal charges against 97 defendants. Now, there were other defendants who were charged in connection with those riots, many of them in state court. These 97 were just the federal charges brought in that district. 58 of those 97 have now been dismissed. Now, I know you're a former U.S. attorney. When I was a federal prosecutor, it would have been unusual to dismiss such a large percentage of any category of indictments that had previously been issued. But if 58 of those 97 have now been dismissed, it has me scratching my head. You have any idea why these cases against those particular violent extremists were dismissed in such high numbers?
I really don't know enough about those cases, Senator, to be able to reflect on it. The only thing I would say is, you know, what our guideposts were when we were federal prosecutors was, do the facts fit a violation of a federal statute? And if they do, you pursue prosecution. And I don't know if that's what happened in the case of those dismissals or not. I just don't know enough about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome to the witnesses, particularly Mr. Whitfield. At 86, your mom deserved a hell of a lot better. I want to welcome Mike German in particular back to the committee, because when he got off his undercover work with the FBI, he came to Rhode Island when I was U.S. Attorney and was one of the agents in our FBI field office, and I've had the chance to see the quality of his work firsthand, so it's great to have him here. Couple of questions. Let me start with Dr. Pape. Does history show incidences when violence against a population was preceded by propaganda against that population?
Yes, sir. Northern Ireland is probably our key case we should focus on. In Northern Ireland, there was community support for violence among Catholics in the late 1960s, immediately preceding the rise of the IRA.
So let me jump in and ask if the lesson of history here is also that sometimes the propaganda against that population is deliberate.
Yes, sir. The key part of the deliberate that matters, and this is also critical in the Great Replacement, is the intentionality that's attributed to the actor being evil, malicious. So what you saw on the video that Senator Durbin showed wasn't just simply claims of demographic change. The core part, the anger that creates the violence, is the malicious intent ascribed to those political actors.
And Mr. German, are there indications that propagation of Great Replacement theory is deliberate?
Certainly, and I think it's important to make a distinction between people on the internet saying things that are troubling, people without any position of authority, and authority figures saying those same things. Because when an authority figure says that, somebody who has actual power, it presents a different opportunity to somebody who chooses to be violent, that they're no longer criminal, they are part of a government faction that is encouraging them to commit this violence. So the calculus they have to make is much easier to make, which is why I think that they could amass such a large amount of people that they could actually overwhelm the Capitol Police and assault our democracy. So I think those having authority figures repeat these racist conspiracy theories is what's different now than from when I was working these cases.
So let's go back to before authority figures start repeating these theories, and let's go back to their propagation. I believe Dr. Pape suggested that their history shows that before you get to violence against a population, very often there's a deliberate campaign of propaganda targeting that same population with the purpose often of fomenting that violence. You've said that there are indications that propagation of Great Replacement theory is deliberate. If there are indications that Great Replacement propaganda is deliberate, are there indications not just of what authority figures might be spouting it, but about who is creating it and pushing it out into the internet and into society?
Again, the Great Replacement theory isn't something new, right? The European colonization of the quote-unquote New World was a white supremacist program. The white supremacy was part of our founding and part of our history. So these ideas have always been there. I mean, one of the things
but it seems that they have a lot more currency right now, and it looks like there's been a lot of talk about how much this has spread on Fox News, for instance. Do you think that Fox News is creating this as original content within Fox News? Or do you think there are entities or an enterprise of some kind that is creating the content to be fed to Fox News? Dr. Pape.
So once we have these ideas in the mainstream, sir, the mechanism of their propagation is not a little secret cell somewhere or, let's say, Russian bots. It's the incentive structure of the system. What we are seeing is we're seeing that figures who tout the Great Replacement are being rewarded by becoming more popular after their shows touting the Great Replacement than before. What we're seeing are politicians becoming more popular, receiving more votes by touting these ideas than before. What we're specifically Donald Trump, our former president, highly unlikely to have the political power he has today were it not for January 6th and the ideas underneath that. So what we're seeing, sir, is once these ideas move into the mainstream, the mechanism is no longer a secret cell organization that's, we just got to go root it out. It's unfortunately the incentive structure, and that's why we need a big conversation in the country about this, because otherwise that incentive structure is just going to drive us to more violence.
Well, with my time expired, let me follow up with questions for the record. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitfield, we all express our condolences to you and your family for your